Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I am 12 Kyle. Check this out. On this episode, we are talking about the hit TV series Snowfall. As you see the title, 100% chance of snow because it's going to snow on this episode. I wanted to wait a little while before I talked about this series. This series is one of the best series I think that's ever premiered on network TV. I will be biased and be open about my bias that I think it's one of my favorite TV shows to ever premiere on network TV. And that's saying a lot because I have a lot of favorites, but this is right up there near the top. So, man, let's get into it, man. Snowfall. If you're not familiar with, let me just put this disclaimer out there. If you're not familiar with the show that premiered on FX called Snowfall, you still should listen to this podcast. I'm going to talk about in broad terms about the characters and things that happened without giving it away. I'll try not to. I will assume that if you clicked to listen or if you clicked to watch on YouTube, thank you for watching, that you probably have seen the show, at least a few times. So let's get into it. What is Snowfall? Snowfall was a crime drama on FX set, I think it was between like 1983 and 1990. And it is a series about the crack epidemic and also playing in the background the United States involvement into the crack environments of the Black community. And so it's set between 1983 and 1990. And I'll on this episode, I want to talk about the characters, John Singleton, the original director, creative mind behind it, and much, much more. And I'll get into, eventually my thoughts on it and, whether or not a hugely debated topic is whether or not Snowfall is as good or better than the hit TV show from HBO called The Wire. But we'll talk about that in a little while. But yeah, this series debuted, what was it, August? Yeah, it was, I'm sorry. It was July 5th, 2017, which is amazing when you think about it because like that, it doesn't feel like it was that long ago. But Snowfall really, to me, came out of nowhere. And I'll tell you about how I got hooked on it. But it premiered July 5th, 2017, and obviously 6 seasons ran, and it ended on April 19th of this calendar year, 2023. But yeah, it's set in the 80s. So just personally speaking, as someone who grew up in the 80s, anytime you have something with the 80s on TV, I'm in. You know what I'm saying? I'm checking for it, right? And I'll be honest, I wasn't initially checking for Snowfall, right? And let me give you my story, and you'll kind of understand how and why I came to it. So we were, my friends and I think I'd seen the previews for Snowfall or something, and I was like, yeah, I'll check it out, and I have a habit of like kind of grouping things together. And I think when I saw like a trailer or something like that for Snow, the trailer looked pretty good, but I was like, okay. And, you know, up until this point, we had, you know, movies and TV shows like The Get Down and what was the other one? I can't remember the name of the other joint from the 80s or whatever. And so I'm thinking like, okay, it's based on this and it's the 80s. You know, hopefully they don't mess this up. But I didn't have a lot of expectations or anything like that. So, funny story. As legend would have it, I started watching episode 1, right? And I remember it distinctly. But episode 1 really, as it's setting everything up, unbeknownst to me, as it's setting everything up, episode 1 moves extremely slow, right? And so I was like, after I saw episode 1, I was like, yeah, that's okay. You know, it didn't blow me away. It wasn't bad. It wasn't, you know, awful. It was worth watching again, right? But I told myself, like, I'll come back to it. The problem was I never came back to it. So the subsequent episodes happened after episode 1. And I don't know, it gets to probably about episode 9 or 10. It's very, very late in season 1. And it just, I never forget it, like in our group chat, me and my boys. One night, it was a Wednesday night, I'm getting like messages like crazy. And I'm doing something else. I'm not even knowing, I just feeling my phone vibrate. I'm like, what are these dudes talking about? So I pick up the phone and the conversation's going. It's like, man, Franklin Saint. I'm like, who the hell is Franklin Saint? I don't know this dude. Like, what are y'all talking about? And I finally stopped the fellas and I'm like, hey, what are y'all talking about? And they were like, Snowfall. I was like, what the hell is Snowfall? They're like, you're not watching? And they were like having a conversation as if everybody in the group was watching. And it turns out everybody in the group was watching but me. So I was like, okay. And then I asked him, I said, well, is this the story about the dude, the drug dealer dude? It's like, yeah. I was like, oh, I saw episode 1 and I stopped watching. And it was like, yo, you need to get back on that. You gotta catch up. And I hate when people tell you got to catch up on something because it's like, what for? And no, 9 times out of 10, like it's not even worth catching up for. But anyway, so I chill for a second, and that night they go on and on or whatever about what happened, and I distinctly remember somebody saying like, yeah, you know, the season ends next week. I was like, oh, that's great. But I did tell myself, I was like, look, yo, you got to go back and you got to watch this thing and sit down and not be moving around and everything like that and see what's going on. And so I sat and watched it. And I'm like, I can kind of see why and how and why it got off to the slow start that it did. And it was very deliberate. And shout out to John Singleton for that. But it just took off. And literally, I was hooked. I can't think of too many shows that just got me like from, because I'm a very picky watcher of TV. Other than Insecure, as long as I've done this podcast, there's only been me talking about one active TV show, and that was the breakdown that I did of Insecure when it went off the air. Shout out to Maya from We Did That Shit podcast. We did an episode together after Insecure went off the air. So this is the second time in the history of this podcast that I'm doing something about a active show. That should tell you a lot about how I feel about Snowfall. So yeah, set in the 80s, the main character, or at least one of the main characters initially, was a kid by the name of Franklin Saint. Franklin Saint, black teenage kid, didn't necessarily, wasn't a street kid. You know, he seemed to be a kid going to school, trying to, you know, find his way. Wasn't in gangs or anything like that, which was very prevalent in, you know, LA at the time. But he manages to literally stumble into the drug game. And I'll touch on the characters in just a second. But that's what Snowfall was. And I think one of the things that stood out about Snowfall was that when you were in, you're in. Like the writing, the acting, the way that it's shot, all of that brings you in. I think one of the things that really, and it didn't really kind of hit me until like season 3, until somebody mentioned it on Twitter, like there's no theme song to Snowfall. Nothing. You get a scene, you get the word Snowfall spelled out on the screen, and then it maybe kind of washes away, it disappears or whatever. And that's it. Like there's nothing. You may get a song on the outro, maybe, but no, you know, it's not the music. Any music that you heard during the episodes were very reflective of the time. So yeah, later on in the series, you might hear NWA or something like that in somebody's car, but theme song, no. It Snowfall didn't come to play. They came to give it to you straight, no chaser. And I mean, like, I love that about the show. Like they understood, like, we only have a very small amount of time to get this to you. We don't have time to play around. You know, we don't have time to waste time. And I love that about the show. But yeah, it went on for 6 seasons, 6 very strong seasons. I could make a case that, you know, again, it's some of the best TV that we've seen. Sans the Tiger episode. But that's another story for a whole nother day. But yeah, that's what Snowfall was. I mentioned the hook. One of the things that hooked me initially was the involvement of the CIA with the Iran-Contra, with guns and ultimately crack coming to South Central Los Angeles and then permeating throughout the city of LA, from Compton to Inglewood to Watts, wherever, right? That element, to me, hooked me, because if you study history, and you guys know from listening and watching this podcast, I'm a big history buff. Because history, if you study history, you understand history. People can't change what happened. Like you can try to spin the narrative on what happened in history, but history at its bare bones deals with the fact, right? So I was very familiar with, because it was an era that I lived through, but keep in mind, I grew up in South Carolina, Florence, South Carolina, to be specific. So I wasn't in Compton or LA or, you know, Watts or anywhere near what this was going on. But I do know my history, and I do know of the involvement that the United States government had with pumping crack into the Black community at that particular time, funding the Iran-Contra affair. And so while there are a lot of people over a period of history that will be complicit and say, well, no, we didn't have any involvement in it or whatever like that, the truth is the truth. And to my knowledge, at the time of this recording, up until this day, the CIA has never acknowledged the fact that they had a hand in funneling guns and drugs into this particular community. So the tie-in between the two hooked me because I'm like, yo, it's almost like they're retelling the story. Of course, it's an interpretation of a historical fact, right? Or historical facts. And if you're familiar with Freeway Ricky Ross, not Rick Ross the rapper, but Rick Ross the drug kingpin, his involvement with the CIA, his involvement with the cartels, and him becoming a kingpin in the United States, in LA in particular, is well documented. You can look it up. And Franklin Saint's life and dealings are loosely based on Rick Ross. Now, this is where it gets a little fishy because Rick Ross will tell you that he met with John Singleton. John Singleton allegedly, they had a deal allegedly, and he was going to bring Rick Ross on as a consultant, so forth and so on. And according to Rick Ross, that never happened, and he looks up and Snowfall's on TV, right? And it's 2017. So now it just depends on who you believe. So the question always comes up is Snowfall real? No, it's not real, but it is a very succinct interpretation of historical facts and historical events that happened with a Hollywood twist. And a Hollywood twist is very important because it is necessary to tell this story. Because you can't implicate the cops and the CIA and just kind of walk away from it. No, I mean, like, somebody's got to take the blame. And then, again, it's Hollywood. So, some things aren't going to be realistic, like having a tiger in your backyard and somebody jumping out of the cage. Let me stop. I'm not going to mention that tiger episode again. So yeah, it was, that's what it was. So is it real? No, it's not real because nothing that you see on TV is real. However, it is based on historical events. Now, the John Singleton effect. As I mentioned, John Singleton, creative director of Snowfall. Unfortunately, John passed away in 2019. If I'm not mistaken, he was there for the first 3 seasons of Snowfall. And John's legacy and vision, any actors or actresses will tell you, anybody working on Snowfall will tell you that John's legacy continued on and it permeated throughout the series, even when he was no longer with it. I will say this, I give much props to the cast, to the crew, to the directing team, everybody that worked on Snowfall, because I can imagine that was extremely difficult to do, to push on after John passed. As many of you know, John Singleton suffered a stroke in 2019, and then he passed away subsequently after that. But really, to still be able to carry out his vision, I think says a lot, because sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes someone can give you the vision of what they think it should be, and then you try to carry out that vision, but there's no way of saying that you know that it's going to come out correctly or come out the way that person would have wanted it to come out. So again, major props to anybody, any and everybody that worked on Snowfall, because I can imagine how difficult that was to do, to pick up and carry on when John was no longer there. And then to lose him so suddenly, that had to be tough. So yeah, props to them. As far as the characters were something else. I read something, I'm going to read it to you, that a writer once wrote about Snowfall. He or she said, quote, Snowfall makes the bold choice to portray how Black love survives or dies amid Black ruin. There have been many instances of love dying and surviving through the show's run. But because Franklin is at the center of it all, it's understandable that the fans would want to see him and his love survive. That desire is what makes Franklin's character someone that you root for or root against, close quote. I agree. And I'll touch more a little bit on Franklin as far as the ending, but Franklin is one of the main characters. He's a member of a family. Franklin is the only child of Sissy and Alton. And I'll touch on them in just a second. But like I said, good kid, at least starting out. But he rises to become this kingpin. And, one of the best cocaine crack dealers in the world. So there's Franklin. Then there's his counterpart or his partner, if it was what he thought was his partner, Teddy McDonald, a.k.a. Reed Thompson. He was the CIA cooperative working undercover for the CIA, and he and Franklin got into business together. And in his mind, he was working for the CIA and working against communism, against the Nicaraguans. But his job was to, once he found Franklin, to help Franklin pump crack. And once they pumped that crack, it was about making the money. The next character I want to talk about was only there for, she was there what? She was seasons 1 and 2. And that would be Lucia Villanueva. She was the daughter of a Mexican crime boss, and she was heiress to the Villanueva cartel. And the thing, even going back to, like I mentioned earlier, the first episode, I think the thing that was key for me was that you had 3 parallels going at the same time. Franklin had a story, Teddy had a story, and then Lucia had a story. And I think what was interesting was they were on separate parallels, but the writers and the directors were trying to get them to a certain place. And I think in my viewing, I got frustrated trying to watch it, but eventually they got there, and in them getting there, it hooked us all. Then there is my man, Gustavo, aka El Oso Zapata. He was a former Mexican wrestler, and he was affiliated with the Villanueva cartel. This man went from wrestling to pushing drugs. One of my favorite characters on it, man. I like Oso. He went by Gustavo. He went by Oso. But to see his transition was good. And then the aforementioned mother for Franklin, Sissy Saint. She was what does Sissy do? Sissy worked in she worked in like real estate. She was I remember somebody referred to her as the West Coast Florida Amazon. And that's not fair. But she played, oh my gosh, she killed it in a lot of scenes. Next was her brother, the OG, Uncle Jerome Saint. Jerome, he got to start as Jammin' Jerome. He had He had a car stereo business, and he was a legit dude, man, until he started, hustling little nickel bags and dime bags, and he brought his nephew into, selling weed, and it took off from there. And I mentioned Sissy was married. Sissy was married to Franklin's father, biological father, Alton Saint. Alton Saint, I want to say Alton Saint was he in, I can't remember if he was in Vietnam, but he was a former Black Panther. His story and his timeline was very, very key to Franklin, especially as you saw Franklin ascend and then fall. Alton was a former alcoholic, and he was somebody that Franklin, even though that was his dad, really despised. And I'll get to a scene in just a second here. Then there was Lee Simmons. Lee Simmons is Franklin's best friend. He childhood friend and grew up together. He basically was second in command behind Franklin for a while, and I'd probably say the whole time, because there's nobody else that he trusted more than Lee, and they were best friends. And I don't know if we ever knew if Lee had any siblings, but you could clearly tell, especially with Franklin being an only child, that they were brothers. They were definitely brothers. Who else? One of my favorite characters in all of Snowfall, my man Avi Drexler. Avi was the coolest. Avi was the dude who put Franklin up on game. He put him in the game. He said, "Here you go. If you can flip this coke, you can do this for me." He was an Israeli drug dealer / gun distributor. Avi did a little bit of everything, but he would, like every line Avi delivered, man, that's my guy. That hands down one of my favorite. Avi's he might be my second favorite character on it. I love Avi, man. Hey, when they took Avi out, man, I was hurt, dog. I was hurt. For the first 2 seasons, Kevin Hamilton, another one of Franklin's friends. Kevin was that dude, man. Kevin was that dude, and their friendship and Kevin's ultimate demise set a whole bunch of things in motion. Then there was Andre Wright, the cop who was lived next door to Franklin, and he wasn't going to take no shit from Franklin. And he didn't like Franklin, and he really didn't like Franklin because Franklin was dating his daughter, Melody, or Mel. Mel was on for the first 3 seasons, I think. She was good. She was good. She was dope. Then there was Veronique. Veronique was not popular at all. Veronique was there for seasons 5 and 6. She was Franklin's girlfriend and then baby mama. She caught a lot of people on Twitter. Well, of course, we watch and we tweeting and stuff. A lot of people didn't like Veronique. They didn't like her hairstyle. They didn't like what she was wearing. They didn't like Veronique at all. They didn't trust her. You name it, it was what it was. Who else? Oh, I cannot forget about Uncle Jerome's girlfriend and then eventual wife. Man, listen. She was oh my gosh, what's the name? I drew a blank just that fast. Damn, I'm gonna have to look it up. I hate when I have to look up stuff. What was her name? Oh my gosh, I'm about to fall out of here. I know her name is Angela. Hang on. I hate when I have to look up stuff. Louis. Damn. I forget Louis. I know y'all screaming at me. Louis. Yeah, Louis. She was his girlfriend. She was another one that kind of, egged Jerome to put Franklin in the game. And but when he put Franklin in the game, Franklin wasn't, he wasn't. It was small time. Like nobody knew that it would go to this level. But she became Auntie Louie, and it's funny, man, because when you see the responses on social media, like there were people that really didn't like Louis. I cannot believe I had a brain freeze just like that, because I'm doing this with no notes, very little notes. Yeah, people didn't like Louis, and we'll talk a little bit more about Louis in a second. Can not forget about Leon's girlfriend and then eventual wife, former crackhead, a clean crackhead now, Wanda. Wanda was different. Wanda came a long way, dog. She came a long way. I mean, like, to go from being on crack to getting cleaned up, to getting married, to moving to Africa and coming back, and that don't happen every day. And there's rumors, depending on who you believe and what you hear. There's rumors that Wanda will have her own spinoff show. We'll see. Time will tell. I'm not sure how true that is. But I mean, they definitely left the door open for it to happen. If Wanda gets her own spinoff, I'm assuming Lee will be there. So if Lee's there, I'm there. So yeah, those are some of the characters. I think the characters really, really did a good job in carrying a lot of the scenes, which is a perfect segue into what I want to get into next, is some of the most memorable scenes. Now, I'm going to play audio clips, and unfortunately, if you're watching on YouTube, I can't put them here, because if I put them here, they're going to take them down. So if you're listening via audio platform, you'll get a chance to hear it. First scene that I got, and these are just some of my favorite scenes. The first scene that I have here is Franklin versus Andre, right? And so Franklin is panicking because he has a file, and in that file there's pictures of everything, and then pictures of him dealing with Teddy, or Reed Thompson at the time, because he told him at first his name was Reed Thompson. He come to find out his name was Teddy McDonald. So Andre, who again is a cop, Mel's father, lives directly next door to Franklin, gets his hand on this file, and he's going through the file, and he's like, I can't believe what I'm seeing. Like, oh, now he's connecting all of the dots. Now he's understanding that not only is Franklin dealing crack, but he's basically being hired by the federal government, and but he didn't know who Teddy was, but he had pictures of him. And these were pictures that Franklin had gotten because Franklin wanted to find out more and more about, who Teddy was or whatever. So Andre gets his hands on the file, and basically Franklin confronts Andre in his own house, and Andre tells him, and Franklin pulls a gun on him. Andre said, well, you're not going to kill a cop in his own house. And you know what? I'll let you hear the rest of it. Check this out. Yeah, that was a cold scene. It was at that moment that let me further know that Franklin Saint was not to be played with. Another favorite scene. This is probably the most played scene of any Snowfallers, right? Franklin and Lee in the car, they just left. They were confronted by another drug dealer who they partnered up with by the name of Man Boy. Shout out to Man Boy. Man Boy was good. I like Man Boy. He, as a bad guy, Man Boy is pretty cool. So they're riding, and Lee is telling Franklin, like, hey, man, thanks for having my back. And Franklin completely goes off on Lee. Check it out. Man, that's the illest scene right there. That is the illest scene. Man, listen, another one of my favorite scenes, man, was Franklin versus Avi. And again, now you got to remember, Avi's the one that put him in the game. Avi gave him the game. He put him in the game. He put him on. And Franklin's needing his money, and he ends up pulling a gun on Avi. Man, listen, check this out. Cold. Cold. I just mentioned Man Boy. I gotta give you one with Man Boy. This one right here is very complicated because of the events that led to this. Lee didn't mean to, but he shoots up this car with these dudes in it. And in the back seat is a chick and her little girl. Well, the little girl gets killed. The chick survives, and she sees who the trigger man is, and then she knows it's Leon. Unfortunately, the chick was dealing with Scully. And Scully was another wow. I mean, like, Scully was like the ODB of drug dealers. Like he was crazy. And so, and also the chick who got, who didn't get killed, Scully's girl, is also Man Boy's sister. So Man Boy loses his niece. And so he's basically coming to Franklin to confront him like, hey, you got to give up Lee so I can do what I need to do. And if I can do what I need to do with Lee, as far as take Lee out of here, then that'll keep Scully off your back. It's so many layers of the game and how things work and how, drug dealers went about things. But I'm gonna let you take a listen to this. Man, that was cold. I remember that episode like it was yesterday. That was cold. We was like, yo, we were bugging when it happened. Probably one of the toughest scenes was Franklin versus his dad, Alton. And I use the word dad lightly because you can't pistol whip your father, man. But in this one, Franklin loses it and ends up pistol whipping the man who gave him life. Take a listen. Man, that was cold. That was cold. And the last clip I'm gonna play for you. This is when you knew shit got out of hand, right? Franklin versus Aunt Louie. Louie, you can make a case that Louie, things started going downhill when Louie wanted to go left. I mean, am I lying? I don't think so. things started going left. When she wanted to go left, that's when things started going downhill for Franklin. That's when the money got stolen. That's when he had to fight for everything. I mean, you don't need me to tell you. Take a listen. That was the beginning of the end. Speaking of the end, the ending of Snowfall was very, very, very excellent. I kept saying, and I kept tweeting this probably like the last 2 or 3 weeks that the show was on. Please land the plane, because that's all you had to do. And I understand that it's tough because, hey, here's the thing: when we think about series, some of the better series that we've seen on TV, and I'll just use these two in particular: The Wire and The Sopranos. Their endings. Now, The Sopranos ending was kind of left up to your interpretation. The Wire, not so much. I don't think they did a good job at landing the plane. I think they were stacked. The deck was stacked up because we didn't know what was going to happen in that final episode. And ultimately, I think, the viewers, because here's the thing, even before I get into that, let me tell you this. By the time we get to the last episode, right, Louis on the run. And this is a spoiler for anybody who hasn't seen it, but I mean, you've been listening and watching this long. I will assume that you've watched this series by now. Louis on the run. Uncle Jerome's dead, which hurt. I mean, bro, we was really pouring out liquor for Uncle, man. Uncle Jerome, come on, man. Great character, by the way. Legendary lines. Dude, he stole a lot of scenes. Abby's dead. Sissy's in prison. Teddy's dead. So it's like, you gotta land this plane, and you have a very small strip of runway to do so. Can you do it without messing it up? And did they ever? I absolutely love the ending. And one of the reasons why, let me pull this up. One of the reasons why I ended up doing this episode was because of a tweet that I saw. And I'll read you the tweet. It wasn't even from somebody that I follow. It was retweeted into my timeline. And of course, in the last episode, we see the demise of Franklin Saint. Franklin Saint is spinning. He is distraught after his mom kills Teddy just before Teddy can make the transfer to him getting back half of his $73 million. His mom is in jail. She's not talking to him. He's cussing his mom out. The walls are literally closing in on Franklin, right? And we all wanted, or at least most of us, wanted Franklin to win going into that last episode. And people wanted to see him live happily ever after. But the reality is that Franklin, and I told people this going into that last episode, I'm like, he's probably going to die or go to jail, because I couldn't see no other way. Because here's the thing, he had done too much to keep going smooth. Like, while I didn't foresee the plot twists and turns of the final episode, which was brilliantly written and brilliantly directed and even more brilliantly acted, I think the thing that stood out to me was where we thought the plane was going to land here, it landed here, but it landed on just the right spot. So Franklin, because his life is in turmoil, if you notice in Snowfall, and I think he references in somewhere like season 2 or 3 that like he didn't drink and he wasn't going to drink. Franklin never got high. We never saw Franklin smoking weed. We definitely didn't see him snorting coke. Definitely didn't smoke crack. And he never drank. Now, we do know that his dad, Alton, was an alcoholic. He didn't want to be like his dad. Didn't want to be like his dad at all. But I want to say he referenced something, or maybe I'm making it, I don't know. But I think he referenced something in an episode where he said something to the point of he wanted to make sure that he had it all control. Well, he's out of control at the beginning of the episode, goes into a bar, the bartender feels sorry for him, gives him a shot. He drinks it. And up until that point, we had never seen Franklin take even the most smallest of swigs of anything. And that drink from that bartender led Franklin on a downward spiral that he couldn't stop. And I think it was very prophetic the way that it happened. But I'm going to read you this tweet. And it talked a little bit about, and this tweet was the reason why I did this podcast. It says, every hood is from somebody named Mike Baggs, Baggs. Shout out to Mike Baggs. Quote, every hood in America has a Franklin Saint who is either a fiend or a drunk who still reminisces the 80s while hanging on the corner. The season's finale of Snowfall was so powerful to Black America because we all know or grew up with someone around who had it all and then lost it all. 1,000%. That tweet really hit home for me because it made me think about some of the people that I saw in my small hometown of Florence, South Carolina. Some of the dudes that were standing in the corner, some of the dudes that went to Vietnam, some of the dudes that turned out to be drug dealers. Now, I'll be honest, I ain't grew up around a whole bunch of drugs. I ain't grew up around a whole bunch of drug dealers. But you knew of people, maybe not in my neighborhood, but the neighborhood over here or over here. And that tweet made all the sense in the world to me because I think we all know somebody like that. That old head that's on the corner. And it seems like he's been on that same corner for the last 20 years. And he's smoked out, he's drunked out. But he got a story, though. But we not, because he's messy, we're not going to sit there and talk to him or try to figure out what his story is. And that's who Franklin Saint became. Franklin Saint became the old head, the old guy on the corner that was just washed up. I mean, like he literally was just washed up. So he loses everything. Loses his money. Veronique goes off, has the kid. And in the last episode, they actually are time traveling a little bit. So they go a year, I think, and then 2 years and then 3 years. Leon, we assume, went to Africa because Wanda goes to Africa and he had to go find Wanda. But I mean, his mom's in jail. He's out of that 37 million. And he's just struggling. He's in his mom's old house. He's not paying the taxes on it. And so much stuff is going on. So much stuff is going on. I mean, like he's literally failing at life. And just a few years earlier, he was on top of the world, getting ready to walk out the game. Now, Oso did get out the game, and I was happy to see Oso get out the game and make it to Mexico and start a new life. And he had paper. But everybody was rooting for Franklin, particularly in that final episode, like they were rooting for him to make it. And I went into that final episode just thinking like he's gonna die or he's going to jail. One of the two. I did not see the plot twist and turn for him to fall the way that he fell. I mean, like he fell off big time. But that's reality. Yeah, I mean, he could have died in a hail of bullets. But the way that they told the story was very I thought it was very fitting. So even in the final scene, we see Leon and Franklin, just like they were in season 1, in episode 1. They're walking around a neighborhood, and they seem to be a lifetime removed from where they were, right? Franklin's bitter. He's hurt. He's broken. In a lot of ways, the world has moved on, and it's moved on without him. You know, a lot of stuff was going on. He was talking about how, you know, he was getting calls from the CIA, and he said people were calling, hanging up, and he was very, very much paranoid. We don't know that there was somebody checking for him or calling him, but you know, he was done. Again, he was broken. And so they walk around the neighborhood, and it's funny, as they're going through the neighborhood, they walk past a movie set. And this movie set is Boys in the Hood. And that was the tip of the cap, an acknowledgement to the late John Singleton. And it's funny because as they walk past the set, Franklin yells, "You won't win an Oscar." And he tells Lee about, you know, how his life was. And he said, you know, Veronique had the baby, a son, and she told him that she was going to break the generational curse. And but she wasn't going to tell them where they were or anything like that. And, you know, like I said, Franklin's talking at this point, and Lee is being Lee. Lee is being Lee. He's just listening. And that's what Lee did. Like, Lee was a soldier for Franklin, man. I mean, like, they were boys to the very end. And then Lee tells him, "Hey, man, I started a clinic. You know, we had this limb bias law came in effect, which really did come into effect after limb bias, the former Boston Celtic, who tragically overdosed on cocaine just days after being drafted by the Boston Celtics from the University of Maryland." And he's telling Franklin, like, "Hey, man, I got this thing going, started this legal clinic. It's helping people, you know, get on their feet." He kept calling it Jim Crow. And they get outside the convenience store, Child's convenience store, which is, I want to say it was in episode 1 too as well. And Franklin said, "Hey, man, you got some money?" Because at that point, Franklin wanted to get drunk. He wanted to drink. So Lee gave him the money. He goes in and comes out, you know, with the liquor. And then they're walking back down the street. And as they're walking down the street, Franklin's talking to Lee. And then they see the LAPD busting into his house, and they're basically confiscating the house because Franklin has not paid the taxes on it. Lee tells Franklin, "Hey, man, I can pay the taxes for you. I'll get you out of this." And Franklin tells Lee that, "Nah, man, I'm good. I'm free." He said, "I don't have any chains on me." And then the episode ends like this. The episode ends with Kendrick Lamar's Pride being played, ending the tragic descent of Franklin Saint. And I think, I can only speak for Black people. I think Black people, Black men in particular, a lot of us saw Franklin because we knew of Franklin. We knew guys like that. And like I said a little earlier, they wanted them to live happily ever after, but the addiction kicked in, and he was never going to live happily ever after. He was going to be, like I said, drunked out or coked out, one of the two, or cracked out, however you want to call it. But I think the thing that made me happy about these series is that even in his demise, we as fans still wanted more. We wanted more of that. We wanted more of Franklin because we wanted to. Everybody loves a redemption story. So, in a perfect world, Franklin gets clean and he goes off with Lee and they start, legit business, and they get together and, he finds somebody else and has a kid and lives his life, a certain way. But, we don't get a chance to live in fairy tale. We don't get a chance to have 57 opportunities, to get it right. But I think Snowfall is something that I think definitely has a tremendous legacy. How will Snowfall be remembered? I think it'll be remembered very well. I think it'll be remembered for what it was and what it did do and how it made us feel. I think it's a time capsule piece that over time, I think we'll understand it has sat well. Snowfall was a show that pushed your boundaries, and the focus was what it needed to be. It needed to be on us, what we needed to do. And, even the characters, everybody had their own thing and their own issues, from Louis to Uncle Jerome, to Franklin, obviously, and so forth, so on down the line. But, in the bigger picture, everybody was so tunnel focused on what they were trying to do that they lost a lot along the way, and I think that's important to see. And nobody other than Oso, nobody rode off like into the sunset. But I think the show was very intentional, and it talked and showed us, what crime was, organized crime. And it also showed us how crack really just destroyed, obliterated, our community. And of course it's fictional, but even the realistic ties in with the federal government. You can understand why this show touched people the way that it did, and left many people very emotional. So I think it'll be remembered very well. Last but not least, is Snowfall better than The Wire? Get that question a lot. Here's the answer. I don't know. I don't have a great answer for that question because honestly, it's too early to tell. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, Snowfall debuted July 5th, 2017. It ended April 19th, 2023. The Wire debuted over 20 years ago. So it's going to take some time before we can even sit down and try to compare apples to apples. The Wire had 5 seasons, Snowfall had 6. The Wire didn't have to try to shoot and make episodes during COVID. Snowfall did. The Wire had different themes and, I guess, focuses, if you will. Snowfall didn't to that degree, but honestly, it really just depends on who you ask. I'll be honest. But for me, I think it's too early to say. It really is. I like it. Snowfall literally just ended a few months ago at the time of this recording. You got to give some time. You got to give some time to breathe. It'll be interesting to see where these characters, where these actors and actresses go on their next journeys. But it's way too early to tell. I'm not here for that discussion. It's been thrown out there, but I'm not participating in that discussion. But hey, ladies and gentlemen, that is my thoughts on the FX hit TV series Snowfall. Again, if you haven't seen this series, do yourself a favor, go back and watch it. In fact, even if you've seen it, go back and watch it. It is a great rewatch. It is, I'll be honest, very addictive, because if you start watching one episode, I promise, I did this just the other day. It came up, and I want to say like episode, it was like in season 3. Just a random episode was just on TV. I was like, yo, let me watch this. I was supposed to be watching something else. I was like, yo, let me watch this. And I sat there for an hour. And then you look up, another hour's going because you roll right into the next episode. So check it out again. Check out these great actors and actresses. I mean, I would be remiss if I did not applaud and salute Damson Idris, the actor who played Franklin Saint. He was incredible. I mean, now the guy's British. I don't know if you guys know that or not. You probably should know that. But I mean, the guy's British, and they actually gave him an acting coach when he came to the set of Snowfall. His acting coach was a guy by the name of Dub C from the West Side Connections. Man, listen, how cool is that? But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I am your boy 12 Kyle. Again, remember to subscribe to the podcast. Episodes like this drop every Thursday at midnight. From time to time, we drop bonus episodes on Sundays. Also, if you feel so inclined, bless the podcast with your financial contributions. Hit us up on Cash App, $TWELVEKYLE. Again, that's going to do it for me. This has been 100% Chance of Snow. My review of Snowfall. Again, I'm your boy 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time. 5,000.